Hello and welcome. I'm Joanna Junak and this is GFN News on GFN-TV. In today's program, Martin Cullip will summarize the latest guidance from Action on Smoking and Health. And James Dunworth will tell us more about the disposable vape devices which have become very popular in the UK. In the UK last month, Ash issued a briefing paper on youth vaping designed for public health officials and trading standards officers. We asked Martin Cullip, International Fellow at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance Consumer Centre, a few questions about this paper. Thank you, Martin, for joining us. Can you tell us why Ash has issued this short briefing?
Ash has said that they wanted to educate schools primarily about the news on youth vaping, because there have been a lot of recent stories in the newspapers that were quite alarmist, talking about an epidemic of youth vaping, and this was going to be a catastrophe for public health. And it was unusual, really, for a public health authority like Ash to come out to be so forthright about it and say that this wasn't the case, that vaping amongst youths is still very low, and that there wasn't anything to panic about. But their briefing gave lots of guidance of what schools should do, what other institutions should do when faced with young people vaping. And one of the things that stood out for me was they said, have you asked them if they are currently smoking? Because obviously that is a different form of treatment that you'd want to direct towards the youth involved. If they're a smoker, it completely changes the dynamic. And it was an important distinction to draw, really, because if you look into the report that Ash came out with earlier this year on youth vaping, which caused a lot of these headlines, not that I'm saying they caused the headlines, it's just the media reacted to the figures in the way the media does. They were pointing out that most of the young people who are using these products are former smokers, and it was only 0.5% of the youth they surveyed, 11 to 17-year-olds, who were never smokers, who were regularly using these vape products. So it is, there was a slight, not as bad as in places like the US, but there was a slight moral panic going on, and Ash's briefing just came out to give a dose of reality, really, to what's actually happening.
In the briefing, we are reading that vaping is not risk-free, but it's much less harmful than smoking. How can young people and those who have never smoked be discouraged from using vaping products?
Well, I often say that I think the difference between here and America is that we don't glamorize or sensationalize vaping in this country. I often say we can buy, my local Sainsbury's, with supermarket, you can buy vaping products in the health aisle next to plasters and toothpaste, and there's nothing really rebellious to a youth about something that's sold in the health aisle, because kids will rebel, and they will try and shock and experiment with things that they're not supposed to have. And I think the best way, really, is just not to make a great big fuss about it. You've also got to bear in mind that the percentage of youth using alcohol, taking drugs, and other very harmful practices is much higher in some cases than vaping. Vaping is a fairly minor concern when compared with other threats to youth in the country.
So how about advertisements and other promotions of vaping products? Should advertising and promotions be regulated to discourage young people from vaping?
Well, that's a balance that has to be made. I think in Scotland, they're currently consulting on bringing in all sorts of restrictions on packaging and flavours, which is what other countries unfortunately are doing. But there is a balance on this, because you don't want to deter adult smokers from switching to vaping products. I think it's probably fair to say that anyone using cartoon characters is being a bit irresponsible in their marketing, but we don't want to really throw the baby out of the bathwater, really. So I hope if they do come up with any sort of measures along those lines, that they are very mild measures, and they take into account that most adult vapors like fruit flavors. Ash's last survey on e-cigarette use in Britain came out with fruit flavours were the most popular flavours at 41% of adult smokers or adult vapors. So they're obviously very attracted to adults. They're not, as some would say, just created to attract children. I vape fruit flavours myself, and I'm in my 50s. So yeah, it's a balance to be set, and I hope they don't let this sort of, like I say, classic moral panic sway them too much and go too far and ruin the appeal of vaping to adult smokers.
According to the ASH briefing, some young people are both vaping and smoking. Is this a big problem in the UK?
Yeah, I think this is something that has fueled some of this panic. I read recently in a comment section for a newspaper article where ASH were quoted as saying, "Look, this isn't as bad as many are making out," saying, "I just don't believe it. I see children vaping everywhere." Well, you may see, youngsters vaping, but how do you know if they weren't smoking beforehand, or that they were former smokers? You don't know that. So it's something that many people will perhaps see, but would they prefer them to be smoking rather than vaping? I don't think so.
Ash pointed out that children who grow up in homes where parents smoke or vape are more likely to smoke or vape themselves. Do you agree with this statement?
Yeah, it's a common. It's been known for decades that one of the main drivers of youth smoking or youth taking up smoking is if their parents or their family friends smoke. It's almost a learned behaviour, if you like. So it's quite encouraging that at the moment we're getting smoking rate amongst youth is still declining. It's down to 3%. I understand that people who regularly smoke who are under 18. So maybe the fact that more adults are using vaping products, it's just been announced that there's 4.3 million in the UK now, is sort of denormalising smoking among families and friends of young people. So rather than seeing people smoke and taking up smoking, perhaps they're seeing people vape and taking up vaping, which is a public health win, really, at the end of the day. I mean, obviously they shouldn't be using either. It's probably not best for them to take up nicotine at all if they're not dependent on it currently. But if they're going to take up one or the other, it's probably best to take up vaping. And so we're seeing smoking among young people slowly dying out, which can only be a good thing.
Do you think the fruit flavors in some e-liquids are encouraging young people to vape?
Well, when they're surveyed and asked why they start vaping consistently, the fact that they come in lots of flavors comes fairly low down the list. Mostly it's just, as Ash described it, it's experimental and rare. That's what they said with youth vaping, and I think a lot of it is that kids will just try things because that's what they do as they're growing up. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think because vaping comes in different flavors, whereas when the only way of getting nicotine was through combustible tobacco, there was just one flavor, tobacco flavor. I think that worries people, but I think it's an unnecessary worry because I like fruit flavors. That's all I vape, and I vape a number of different fruit flavors, and it's just a more pleasant experience, and it keeps me from relapsing to go back to be a smoker again. So that's why I think a lot of people use the flavors, and it's more enjoyable. If you've got something that's more enjoyable, then why would you go back to the thing that you stopped using, the cigarette? And I think we need to keep them enjoyable and resist some of these siren voices that want to ban flavors, as is happening in many other countries. We don't want that happening here.
Thank you, Martin. Ash also pointed out that disposable vaping products such as Elf and Geek Bar have become very popular in the UK. We asked James Dunworth, chairman of e-cigarette Direct, author of Ashtray Blog and steering committee member of the independent British Vape Trade Association, to comment on these findings. Thank you, James, for joining us. First, can you show us what a disposable vape device looks like?
Okay. So they're a slim device, which you can see here. This is one called the Lost Mary, which contain e-liquid and a coil and a pod at the end, which contains e-liquid. They are usually all in one, and you can't usually take them apart, although some manufacturers such as Indica now, I believe, are designing devices which can be taken apart with the idea that you will be able to recycle the separate components.
So why have they become so popular in UK?
Well, it's a good question because disposable devices have been around for many years and they haven't really taken off until recently. I think what we have are several factors coming together at the same time. So first, the devices themselves have improved. You've got some strong flavors, often very sweet, which seem to appeal to a lot of people. But the vape has also improved as well. So you're getting the good, soft but good throat hit and plenty of vapor. And in fact, the vape experience has improved so much that it's appealing to a lot of people who have traditionally used reusable devices. So what you're seeing now is a lot of people might have used mods or pod devices, actually using these side by side. So sometimes they use mods and sometimes or pod systems, and sometimes they use these disposable devices. So they're not just appealing to people who are new to vaping, they're also appealing to people who've vaped before. I also think that what you have now is extension of the convenience culture in the UK, and you can see this across different sectors. So now, if you go into a shop now, you've got lots of pre-peeled vegetables, everything is made to be as easy as possible to use, and to save us time. And I think that's what you're seeing here is where people don't want to spend the time to change the coils and refill the e-liquid, which is strange, right? Because it doesn't take long. I mean, to refill a tank or a pod with e-liquid literally takes seconds, and the cost saving is quite significant. And I know a lot of vape shops explain to people who come in about the cost saving and about the damage that these devices do to the environment, but the urge for speed and convenience is so strong now that it seems to overcome that minor inconvenience. Finally, I think that a lot of people are using these devices at times when it might be difficult to use rechargeable devices. So we see a lot of people buying them when they go to nightclubs, when they're going out for the day, they're going to the beach, or they're going to festivals, or they're going on holiday. And an example I was told about the other day was an experienced vapor who likes going to festivals. And he said until disposable devices came along, he'd actually take cigarettes with him. And then when he was at a festival, he would smoke because it was too difficult to charge up his device. But now that they have these disposable devices, he's actually taking those along and using them instead.
Thank you, James. That's all for today. Tune in next time here on GFN-TV or on our new podcast for more tobacco harm reduction updates. And on Thursday episode, Dr. Findila Shangasi and consumer advocate Kurt Yeo will discuss tobacco harm reduction in South Africa and the impact of the coming excise tax on nicotine vapes. Thanks for watching or listening. See you next time.